Hello, hello. Welcome to Behind the Human. I'm your host, Mark Champagne, and it's my job to unpack the stories, mental fitness practices of people living at the top of their game, personally and professionally. Today was a ton of fun. Kelly and I were jamming back and forth, all things mental fitness and simple living, internally and externally. So let's talk a little bit about Kelly. She is a renowned thought leader in personal development with a focus on minimalist living. She's a podcast producer, host, and writer. She manages a top 1% mental health podcast called Millennial Minimalists. So good. The podcast has over 1.4 million downloads and more than 200 episodes where she interviews New York Times bestselling authors in science, psychology, and entrepreneurship. She also shares her own experiences of simpler living, inspiring others to lead more intentional lifestyles. Enjoy it.
All right. So it is so nice to see your face, Mark. It's been some time since we last connected on the podcast. So I'm really excited to get into this with you today.
Me too. It's been probably a few hundred episodes ago, right?
Yes.
For both of us.
Yes, we have both come a long way, and I'm so proud of you. Mental fitness is such an important topic, and it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm really looking forward to diving into it with you today.
Yeah, me too. It's right back at you with, I remember when we first met just around I think it was one of our first conversations where I was talking about mental fitness and like, we've got to simplify our mind and declutter and so forth. And you're like, hey, this is what we do on our show in all these other different ways as well. And it just felt natural, I think, for us to come back together and, of course, share some learnings and insights on the podcasting front, but just the topic in general, especially in today's world right now where it feels like the complete opposite of being mentally fit and being, intentional or clear. Everything is complex, cluttered, chaotic. And I don't think it has to be like that, at least not in our internal environment.
Yeah, I always say we live in such a noisy world, and especially today. Especially today. And it makes me sad to think that a lot of people are living in this world with all that noise and not being in control of it and just allowing it to control them. So that's why I want to talk about mental fitness today and also reconnect with you. And specifically, we're going to talk about the importance of mental fitness, especially when it comes to helping us clear the psychological clutter and also helping us create space to help us become more self-aware, more content within ourselves, and to also give us the space to learn new knowledge and gain new learning. So, it's all in an effort to help people. For me, my ultimate goal is to help people live a life that is true to them, and I think that is similar to your goal as well.
Yeah, no, for sure, because I think what gets in the way is, because if we really spend some time in reflection or in some thought in the pen and paper or however you do it, like we can get pretty clear on, what we value and what we want to do and who we want to do it with and so forth. But we do have to be a bit preventative or proactive on, okay, well, how do I equip my mind and my environment, frankly, to be conducive to surfacing, the highest quality answers and insight and so forth. So that's my whole mission behind whether it's the podcast, the book, and kind of working with teams and everything in between, is just to make these practices accessible and help people surface what works for them, right? Like you're an avid runner, but if someone listening doesn't enjoy running, that doesn't rule out all of movement. I mean, there are a million different things that you can do to move your body and exercise, and it's the same thing with the mind.
Some of us forget to exercise the mind, and we'll go into how we define mental fitness. But there's people who are aware and there's people who are unaware, and so I think this conversation is really important because we can stress the importance of it to create more balance in our lives. Yeah.
Totally.
But to start today off, I thought we would share a little bit of a background on how we initially met. I interviewed you way back in the day. You interviewed me as well. And I believe both episodes were shared on this podcast, and I'll include them in the link in the show notes. And I wanted to just kind of dive in because there's some unanswered questions I have for you on how we met and
Okay.
how you came to my event. So for our listeners, it was back in 2017, I believe, maybe 2018. I started listening to personal development podcasts. I don't know who inspired me initially, but it was a time in my life where I was thinking maybe I would change careers, and it was so inspiring. So there's this one podcast called Impact Theory by Tom Bilyeu.
Hmm.
He invented the Quest nutrition bar, and he's one of the top podcasters in the world now. And I listened to him when his podcast had just started. And I think it was called Inside Quest at that point.
Oh, wow.
And
I didn't know that.
yes. And his team ended up reaching out to me saying, hey, you're one of our first like 100, 150 listeners. And we want to really build momentum around the world about the work that we do. And so we're looking for, like, they had 3 cities, including Toronto, that could host an impact event. So we called it Impact X Toronto, similar to a TEDx event, where me and someone else in Toronto, who was also a listener of their podcast, came together. We threw one event, and the event involved having an entrepreneur speak about his or her hardships and what they've gone through, and how they got to where they are today. And the whole purpose of this event was to bring people together. It was a community empowerment event. It was for people who were working entrepreneurs, but also people who were lost, like myself. I was very lost in my career path. I didn't know which way I wanted to go next. And I lacked that sense of community at the time. And I wanted to create more community for myself, but also for others in my network. And so that's how it all began. And at one of our events, Mark, you had attended. And I remember it was just such a small group. You found out about our event and you arrived. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this guy is so interesting. He ran one of the coolest businesses, such a successful journaling app that you built called Keo. And I was like, wow, we are lucky to have you at this event. And then you eventually became a speaker at one of our events. So I'm curious, Mark, what inspired you to attend our event? And what motivated you to want to become a speaker as well?
Oh, great questions. And you're really bringing me back down memory lane. Like it's wild how fast time flies. I mean, everyone listening knows that, but it's when you start hearing about the details, it feels like it hasn't been that long. But you did great job, by the way, because you put me right back in that place. I would have been interested in that event because I didn't know you personally. I don't even know how. Probably through social or just the combined network, because we I think now know that we've got a lot of mutual friends and people in the space and whatnot that intersect. But at that time, it would have been the early days of starting Keo. And, for anyone listening that is in the entrepreneurial world or started something on their own or has a small team, like it can be pretty lonely to do that.
Yes.
And, I was feeling that as well. And I just wanted to connect with like-minded humans. And obviously the through line was that, I think everyone there listened to Tom's show and now called Impact Theory and whatnot. So there was this element of, well, I know that, there's got to be like-minded individuals that are motivated and inspired, then they want to grow and they want to learn and connect and so forth. So it's kind of twofold. One, just connecting with people in real life and, having human connections and conversations. And then the other one was there might be really good opportunities here for collaborations with the app and so forth, which, ended up being the thing that got that app to reach so many people, was just collaborations around the world. So I'm happy we did that. I'm happier that I did that because, it led to our relationship, obviously, and like so many other connections. It's super magical. And the speaking the speaking really came after the app, to be completely transparent. Because if we can get into it, but when I had to shut the app down, there was a period there where my own mental fitness and what I was picking up from, at that point, hundreds of interviews and study and whatnot, was the thing that saved me from a spiraling deep depression. I could feel myself going down into that void. And it was coming out the other side, seeing how powerful just questions are and how powerful, we were talking about this just even before we hit record, like some of the small little practices that we use before recording, like breathing and calling a friend and, just being present. Like those were the things that paused the autopilot and all the wrong questions that I was asking, like how could this have failed and so forth, and brought back hope and some motivation and some inspiration. And that's where the speaking came, because like I'm not going on a 14-day silent retreat. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but these are small little things that anyone, struggling, and even better, anyone looking for preventative practices to help their mind, like we can all access these. So that's the motivation behind the speaking and frankly, everything that I do.
Oh my goodness. I'm so happy to hear that, because my main motivation behind continuing this event series was to make people feel like they weren't alone and to make people feel like they had a sense of community around them in the city. And so I'm so happy that it was helpful to you.
Yeah.
We ran this event series for just under a year. It was so much fun. It was all voluntary on everyone's end. And
they're full.
Pardon?
They were full.
Yeah.
From what I remember.
Yeah. There was a lot of people there to support. And, I had some food there and everything so people could mingle. And it was really meaningful. And specifically, I was going through a transition in my life too, some career transition. And it was also at the point where I had discovered minimalism as well. I had been spending a lot of time with my best friend, Lauren, and she inspired me to declutter my closet. And after doing so, I started decluttering other areas of my life, and I started having more clarity around what I wanted to do in my career. But I also started peeling back layers and, these blocks that I had, these walls that I had, these fears that I had. I started letting go of these things so that I could embrace my authentic self. Yeah. And it was a combination of the event series, Impact X Toronto, and starting to declutter all the excess things in my life that really gave me a lot of hope. And it helped me turn outwards as well, helped me realize, wow, like I'm getting so much benefit out of letting go of excess stuff, working through my negative self-talk, working all these things. And then I was able to realize, okay, I'm going to turn outwards and start inspiring and helping others. And then it was a combination of Lauren's interest in minimalism, all of the benefits that I was gaining and my excitement around minimalism that inspired to both of us to go on a trip to Italy and start our first podcast episode. And that's kind of how it came to be. And, ever since, it's been 6 years now, and we've been able to inspire so many people. And at the end of the day, just like starting the event series, Impact X Toronto, my goal is to help others live the life that is true to them. There's all of this excess that gets in our way and prevents us from living out our, the authentic version of the lifestyle that we actually want to live. Right. So,
yeah. When and how did the two worlds combine? Like, I know you went through the decluttering of the closet and so forth, and then it sounds like you just kind of kept going, but was there a particular moment, or was there, like, were you journaling? Like, how did you kind of connect both worlds that, wait a second, I've been decluttering my physical environment, but it's also actually doing the same thing internally?
Yeah. Well, it was actually removing the physical clutter, where once I got everything cleaned out and clutter free and organized, I realized, wow, like I am so mentally distracted partially from over 2020 working from home. I found it hard for me to focus at home in the beginning. I was so distracted by the things around me. And I was very hard on myself too, mentally. I have been for many, many years. And I think it was speaking to Lauren more, because Lauren was starting to realize that while she was really, really good at keeping her place really clean, she also struggled with negative self-talk. And so we had our friendship. We had, we were there for each other, to be there for each other while we were working through these things. And I had started doing therapy. And so I started working on myself. And it was through those experiences that made me realize, wow, like this is a big part of minimalism. This is like a giant part. And it's also my favorite part, because it requires constant maintenance. I mean, I know there's maintenance involved in managing the excess stuff that comes into my property, but I think I've been pretty good at that. I find it much easier than having to manage how I respond to anxiety,
Yeah.
how I, juggle all the thoughts in my mind. Like I have my outlets now and I'm so grateful for them. And whenever someone is going through something, I try to step back and listen and gather what they're telling me and then share advice from there. So that's kind of how it came to be.
You raised some really good points, and I feel like themes that, again, coming back to just like the much needed practices or tools for just what's going on right now. And like, we see it with our friends and family and so forth. I definitely see it within teams around just, when I'll ask individuals to check in with one word, and usually the descriptor for their mind is overwhelmed, that capacity, stress, so forth. And as much as, obviously I'm a big proponent of mental fitness in these practices, but they are, it definitely is work, and you don't always see the results right away. Whereas I feel like if you combine it with everything that you're speaking about, like everyone listening now, and myself included, I don't know, pick a section of your home or even your desk or wherever you are and just clean it up a little bit. And, you can kind of just sit back and take a breath, and it's immediate. Right. Like that's what I'm trying to get at is what you're speaking about that I love. That, a lot of the mental fitness, I mean, of course there are immediate results like breath work and things like that, but this is like instant, if you combine that with, and then you start building your practices as well. And then it's easier to maintain from there at that point, versus always having to go back and like completely clean up a room or whatever it is. There's just there's a sense of accomplishment.
Yes.
It comes with good feeling.
Yes. I always recommend that people start with the area that is stressing them out the most. So I ask that question. Is it the excess in your closet? Is it all the ideas that are overwhelming in your mind? Is it all of the is it all the digital clutter on your computer? Like, is just your computer desktop just full of files? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
And then start from there. But the idea of starting is also overwhelming. And one of my favorite books is Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. And he talks about starting with a tiny habit. That meaning 5 minutes. Take 5 minutes to clear the surface of your desk. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, I don't know if it affects me. It will probably affects you subconsciously. So making those small little changes will also inspire you to make changes in other areas of your life. And again, even if it's 5 minutes every day for a month, you're going to make huge progress eventually.
Yeah, it stacks.
Yeah.
For sure. Just like, the habit stack, the results stack, everything. It's all exponential, which is great.
Yeah.
So what practices then, I'm skipping around a little bit here, but what are your non-negotiable practices right now? What are the ones that, life happens, but there's still, these things are in check most of the time?
Yeah. Okay. So 2 things. Maybe 3. Even if I'm having a challenging day, let's say I don't sleep one night, I will still make these things happen. I will still motivate myself to get my 10,000 steps. I'll still motivate myself to at least do a 20-minute meditation. And the third thing I try to do is I try to call a friend, something social, if not see a friend in person. That sense of connection, I'm living on my own, so it's nice to have that connection, and then also get that exercise because I get so much out of physical exercise. And I'm also very cognizant of what I'm doing while I'm doing that exercise as well, but I'll go into it.
Yeah, I love that. I really like the calling of a friend, and maybe this is just me, but I mean, I have friends obviously and speak to them every now and then, but I don't make it a priority in the day to just call a friend like that. Which again, I don't know if I'm an exception to that or closer to the norm, but it feels like it could be a very powerful thing to do. I mean, and like an actual conversation, I suspect is, even if it's not long, but just like a few minutes of like, actually, hey, how's it going? And check it in and so forth. which I know you mentioned is like a way that you also start like before your interviews, you try to do that as well, which explain that one. Because I feel like that could be helpful for someone that is presenting, someone that is a speaker of some sort, or even has to, present a budget or marketing plan to a team of some sort. Like that little hack that you have is valuable.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. When I'm speaking to someone in the morning before I'm having an interview, it gets me in the groove.
Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of us, we go days without even speaking to anyone, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. You ask yourself, like, wait, I haven't said anything to anyone in the last couple of days. You're like, wow, but I've talked so much to myself in my head.
Yeah.
We do that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. But yeah, I have my methods to help me feel awake and alive and ready for my interviews. But I want to share this with you, Mark. When I think about mental fitness, and I want to know your take on this, because I could be wrong. But when I think mental fitness, I think it's keeping our brain and our emotional health in check. It's about keeping it in shape. I think of a little brain in a man running around, like exercising your brain. But it's also like it's mental exercise, but I believe it's also mental rest. So for me, when I immediately thought of mental fitness, I was like, oh, well, it's mental rest, it's meditation, it's sleep, it's doing nothing, it's disconnecting. But there's also mental exercise. Every day I make time to listen to a podcast because I can gain new knowledge. I read, I write, I play New York Times Wordle and crossword and connections, all those games, Sudoku, just to challenge my mind and to make me smarter. And, both forms, I would say, put my mind at ease in different ways. Mm-hmm. But something that I've thought a lot about recently is overconsumption of information. So lately, I live alone. So I'm living in a space that's quite quiet. So a lot of the time I will fill it with podcasts or news. And that actually causes me mental clutter. Sometimes if it's negative news, if it's just too much knowledge coming at me at once. And I'm starting to be more conscious and aware of that and limiting how much time I listen to podcasts so that I'm not overwhelmed, but also so that I can soak in those ideas. Like sometimes I will go on my long walks and I will listen to nothing, white noise, so that I can like soak in the ideas that maybe I was just studying for my next interview, or some ideas that I just learned from an inspiring podcast so that they can sink in. And I just want to know your thoughts around that, because it's just like exercising the body. We can over exercise the body. We can also over exercise the brain.
Of course. Well, just on the last point though, about taking those silent walks, that is mental fitness, because what you're doing is you're training your mind to be more present. And then you start picking up, the sound of the birds, or if there's water, or your footsteps and so forth, which then again, around, neuroplasticity and forming all those new connections and so forth. When you're in an interview or when you're working on slides, whatever it is, you start to pick up these little details that you may have not picked up before in that like cluttered, frantic version of the mind that, a lot of us, and I'm guilty of this as well too, that we fall into without being intentional with training our minds, right? Because the autopilot, or the default track or default way of operating, unfortunately, is the scattered, kind of overwhelmed. Because you just look, and I don't say this from a place of judgment, but that's what we're surrounded with, right? If we do nothing, it's no different than nutrition. Like if you're not conscious with what you're eating and putting in your body and just rely on marketing in a supermarket, like you're not coming out with a very healthy cart.
Yeah.
Right. So it's no different with what I call mental nutrition around, okay, and for me, it's, I've got a list of, or certain types of podcasts that based on where my mind's at, okay, I need a hit of humor or something from like a smart list or whatever it is, or I need just like some inspiration and some behind the scenes stories and so forth. Yeah. But then also to your point, sometimes we just need to let the mind breathe. and rest, just like you alluded to. I mean, I think to be physically fit doesn't mean that you're training for a marathon, day in, day out, nonstop without any kind of recovery.
Yeah.
Like things start to break down.
Yes.
So it's the same thing. Like for me, the definition of mental fitness is really anything that we do to train our minds to feel good and perform well, encompasses that umbrella, which is mental performance and optimization and rest and recovery. It's all of it, right? And it's the formula that I see come up over and over again through all of the interviews. It's always this. It's so simple, but it's the nuances that we have a hard time with. And it goes like this. It's insight plus action equals infinite possibility.
Okay.
And the insight part, though, is the nuance I would add is clear insight, and like not surface level insight, but like this is the time when you're slowing down, you're doing the meditation or you're journaling, and you start getting past the surface level layers, and you're asking questions like what am I pretending not to know right now, or what am I hearing in the whispers or seeing? Then you start to get these insights, and then if you times that by consistent action, then stuff happens, right? We're better at action, there's a lot of discussion around action, like taking action and feeling like we're taking, steps forward. But it to me, it always comes back to, well, is it the right action? And that's where that check-in piece, which all comes back to that rest and recovery for our mind. That's where we have the hardest, challenge, because it's almost as if we put our minds through a 10 to 12 hour high intensity workout every day.
Mm-hmm.
And just expect it to like bounce back, no problem. And then, we're not sleeping well, and it's like all of the formula elements are off track, So it's just taking a breath and kind of stepping back and, okay, like where can I have some calm in the day?
Mm-hmm.
And pull out of, the looping narratives and so forth. And then you start generating more and more insight, to your point, like going down on the minimalism side of things, start seeing, okay, yeah, I've got some mental clutter here and here. So I'll just slowly work at that. Right. And that's the action. And then all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, like you start seeing clear paths forward, and opportunity shows up, people start showing up, and it was always there. We just need to carve the path so we can see them.
Mm-hmm. I would say that the biggest benefit of living a minimalist lifestyle or living with less is you gain this great sense of awareness, self-awareness.
Yeah.
And so if you are feeling off or you're feeling down, you take the time to process the sensations. You recognize them. You ask yourself questions. I interviewed a great psychiatrist, Dr. Jed Brewer. He wrote a fantastic book. I don't know if you've read it yet, but it's called Unwinding Anxiety.
Okay.
And he says that willpower is not enough. And when I read that, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And he says that we need to explore the sensations that come to us when we're feeling anxious. We need to ask ourselves questions. We need to challenge ourselves by going into a meditation and facing our fears, facing those thoughts and working through them, versus saying, oh, I'm just going to push past it. Well, you're not solving the problem. You need to recognize where these feelings are coming from and how you can work through them. So,
yeah. Well, and that's when we equip ourselves with the tools.
Yes.
And then it becomes, well, you can throw anything at yourself or a team or whatever it is, because you feel you have the confidence that, okay, I have the tools, right? No different than, the business community. It's like you have a certain set of tools and technology and things like that to run the business or the brand or whatever. And when stuff comes up, like we lean on the systems and the processes and things like that. But we often just don't think about that, for our minds. And this is where like the strategist in me is coming out. It's like, well, what's the strategy for my mind? Like what is my default operating mode when high stress situations come up?
Yeah.
Right. It's like, and you think about that path when it's not stressful, right? Like put the principle in play or the operating plan. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but maybe it's okay when something like that happens. For me, it's typically, well, I'm going to do a bit of breathing, just a couple minutes, nothing wild, and then just step away, right? Like maybe there's a long walk, and just take a moment to let what happened or what triggered you to the point of the author you're mentioning, like feel the feels, like let that come through and then release it, versus just, to your point, like just trying to push past. And then that's where you get into these moments where everything just starts to stack. And eventually, we just can't handle it anymore, and we burn out, or we have often too, this is where we see like you get the tension in your neck or your shoulders from stress of a week. Like that's coming from someplace.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's called mindfulness training. And I have to admit, and Lauren and I love to tell our listeners this, we try our best. We're more aware so we can work through our problems and our issues and all the things that arise in our day-to-day that are imperfect. And sometimes when I'm stressed, I eat a ton of chocolate. That's my way of dealing with stress. Sometimes I do have my outlets, but I do have my moments, right? But however, I'm aware of those moments. Like I know, I tell myself, okay, well, how do I feel after I eat a bunch of chocolate? I don't feel great. So now I know that I'm not going to do that again in that way. Like these are the things that cross my mind. Some people don't think too deeply about the things they do or how they react in certain stressful situations. But Mark, I want to get back to the time where, you were attending Impact X Toronto and you were going through a hard time, and you were finding your own tools to work or to help you with your mental fitness and get back to a healthier place mentally. Now, I'm assuming you were reading a lot of books and listening to a lot of podcasts, and you had this incredible podcast that you had already started called Behind the Human that you're still running today. And you interview such incredible minds, and you interview people and talk about their mental fitness practices. And I'm curious, like, what really inspires you to keep doing what you're doing, and what is your ultimate goal?
Oh, well, the short answer is, the goal is, or the mission or the vision is that I really do believe that all of us deserve to wake up feeling great more days than not. Yeah. And that, to your point, like, let's not be naive that every day is going to be perfect, or we're not going to have those moments. And I'm guilty as well. Shout out to local Craig's Cookies if they're listening. That's my guilty pleasure in stressful moments. But I think there are just so many rituals or practices or tools at our disposal that, like, that's why I do it. And it's for the most part, everything we've been speaking about, it's not like we're inventing these things. And a lot of these modalities, especially breathing and whatnot, has literally been around since the beginning of time. So for me, it's, well, if that's the case, then how can I speak to someone or bring someone on or provide a narrative or perspective that will resonate with someone else? And that's why there are chefs on, or there are athletes, or there are writers, and like conversations like this, because there's something kind of for everyone. At one point someone be like, I get that. And that's the opening, to this world for them. So I'm just always on, and plus it keeps it interesting on this side as well. As you get, it's a good excuse to speak to some really interesting people that you probably never would have linked up with in the first place if it hadn't been for the show. But I'm always fascinated that, because you think, especially the like air quotes, like higher profile guests, that they have some sort of magical, right, earth-shattering routine or practice. And I'm thinking of Tony Hawk, who was on later last year, and he's sharing gratitude practices. Like that's how he got through one of his most challenging physical injuries. Well, we don't have to be Tony Hawk to deploy some gratitude practices, right? But people may be interested because, like, oh, like, what's that all about? Like, I know of that individual and so forth, and then that brings people in, right? So that's that's my main goal, or the strategy behind the show and so forth. And frankly, even, with the book and studying and writing on people like the Kobe Bryants or Maya Angelou's or Coco Chanel's and so forth, is that, like, Coco Chanel, like, what's the mental fitness there? Well, there's a ton, once you start looking into it. And then again, like, if that's the interest that draws someone in, whether it's the person or, for me, the question, then it leads into, okay, well, I can, when my coffee's brewing in the morning, maybe I'll just check in with myself, and here's a question I could use, right?
Right. I love that you lead with questions. Like, what are some questions that I can ask myself right now to better my mental health, or better nourish my brain? I love that you say it's like mental nutrition. It's fantastic. Yeah. And I appreciate that you interview so many different guests to share different perspectives on various mental fitness practices that people can adopt. Because, there's some personal development leaders who will say, do this and this and this, and they'll list like 10 things that you should do before 9 a.m. Yeah. And that's not practical for everybody, right? But, what we've shared, Lauren and I have shared, is, here are some ideas, here are some things that thought leaders are doing, and figure out what makes sense for you and then stick to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think if the first step is always, if you can get into a zone of, this is why I want to do this, this is why I want my mind to feel good, and link it or anchor it to something, right? Yeah. Not just that, I just want to feel better, but like it which is good, but it sets us up to fail or not be consistent with the practices. So if you can think of the next even month around an anchor, okay, I really want to work on my mind to be clear or intentional or see opportunities for X, I'm working on this or whatever it is. And then then you can start asking questions. I actually really like your question that you left earlier around the physical environment of what area is in my home is stressing me out the most. And I would flip that to what area in my internal environment is, is an area where I'm not giving the most attention to, or I could give a little bit more attention to, which kind of dovetails with that prompt that I left earlier around, like, what am I pretending not to know? Usually the answer to that question is that very area, right? It's like that thing that is in the back corner of our mind. It's kind of always there, and it's like a slow burn. It's like low grade stress that just continues day in, day out. Is it a relationship, or is it a habit that I want to break that because it's not serving, the person that I want to be or who I'm striving to become. And again, anchoring it to, like, this is where the situation or the event is helpful, because when you're in a moment where it's again, back to physical, let's say it's you're training for a race of some sort, and you have a craving again for something unhealthy of some sort. The micro pause question is, well, if I do this, is this going to help me in my training to run the 10K or whatever it is? And think about, when you're actually running that training, how grateful you'll be that you stuck to your plan, because you're going to feel better in the moment, right? So it's the same thing with the mind. Like, if our default, and the default often is, I'm just going to open up my phone and jump onto social media. Okay, well, let's just take a pause. We know, if we're checking in with ourselves, that we don't even have to check in with ourselves. There's enough data, and we talk about this enough, that probably not going to be left feeling great, in that moment. Like, it just fires up all the wrong chemicals for us. So before you take the next step, and I usually have social media apps tucked away in a folder, kind of 3 screens deep on my phone. Wow. So it gives me a bit of a pause. Yeah. That, wait a second, is this going to derail the next 30 or 60 minutes of my day when I have a clear task that I really want to get done? So just, okay, well, let's just pause. And maybe I just reserve like 10 minutes in early afternoon or something to like check in with things. Same with email, all of these distractions, right? So it's those, like, giving ourselves those micro pauses to make a different decision.
Yes, very, very well said. Oh, I really love that. Again, as part of this lifestyle and the lifestyle that you share, it's awareness, taking those pauses, asking yourselves questions, really exploring those sensations. And you mentioned Kobe Bryant earlier, and I want to mention him here because I had the pleasure of meeting him. I don't know if I ever told you that.
Oh, no.
But when I was in Hong Kong and I was at an event, and I remember them passing around this like unhealthy food, and Kobe saying, "Oh, no, thank you." And me thinking, "Oh, I figured you just eat anything." And I remember him saying, "It's not worth it for how I'm going to feel tomorrow. My health is
Yes.
very important to me." And so
Yeah.
I suppose like he knew that this is not something I want to put in my body because I need to perform at my best. And I just found that so fascinating. And it's those it was actually that conversation and many other conversations during my travels overseas that I realized, wow, these people that we put on pedestals, they're just like us.
Yeah.
And they have simple habits just like us. And they have simple solutions. They're not grandiose solutions. There's little things that we can do each day to make ourselves feel more at peace with who we are, but also to help us feel more clear minded. And for me, like as we live in this crazy, noisy world, I would say, living with less has helped, but also me being alone in my space without any distraction and also taking 20 minutes here and there to meditate has helped me really organize my thoughts and
Yeah.
help me realize what's most important to me. Where should I prioritize my time? Uh, how can I make better decisions? How can I be better at saying no so that I can spend my time more intentionally? And
Mm.
it also has helped me become more present day to day with the people that I'm speaking with myself, and yeah, like I really believe that, letting go of mental clutter, of
Yeah.
excess in your life really helps you prioritize mental fitness. Like it helps you prioritize mental rest and also exercising your mind. So
What's something that you still would like to try for your mind, or it could be physical environment as well, but just like a practice or ritual? Is there anything kind of on your mind?
yeah, I would like to challenge myself to get off social media for a bit.
Mm.
I run our account for Millennial Minimalists, but I would like to disconnect for a bit. The minimalists who inspired
Yeah.
minimalism and are kind of the pioneers behind it all, they quit social media for a year. And, I
Uh,
recently learned, I listened to a podcast between Dr. Aditi. Have you heard of her? She's a Harvard physician.
yeah.
She has a new book called The Five Resets.
Mm.
And in this book, she talks about how the average person picks up their phone 2,617 times per day. But this also includes pickups, taps, and swipes. Like we touch our phone 2,617 times a day on average.
Wild.
It's wild. And
And
that's
not normal.
crazy. Like we're always looking down, we're always scrolling, we're always flipping. And it's just, I want to disconnect more. So
Yeah.
I would say that is my number one goal because I know, yes, I can gain a lot from using my phone. There's a lot of new learnings, great knowledge. Social media is not bad. It's how you use it, right? So I
Yeah.
want to use it with greater intention. I also just want to use my phone with better intention. I've actually come a long way, but I'm still working on it. One of my past interviewees, Mark, is Catherine Price. She wrote a book,
Mm.
How to Break Up with Your Phone. And she doesn't talk about how to break up, like break up with your phone, like let it go. She talks about how to improve your relationship
Yeah.
with your phone. And so that you control it rather than it controlling you. And so I put a few boundaries around my phone. So I've got rid of all these extra apps I didn't need. I moved all my apps to the bottom of my phone so that my front screen is completely clear. There's
Mhm.
less red dots telling me that it's urgent. I've been better at saying no to friends and saying, "Hey, I'll get back to you later," so that I can keep in that flow state when I'm working. And that's what we lose when we are on our phone. We're losing the ability to be in that flow state and to be creative. And I've realized that saying no, most of your friends will understand. They'll understand that there's
Yeah,
got to be
because they
some
want to do
boundaries
the same
set.
thing.
Yeah. And I like the
Right?
fact that you said that you set boundaries around email and
Yeah.
also your phone use. And, there's some app blockers like Moment and Off. I think it's called Off Time.
Yeah.
There's a couple apps out there that can help us with that. But for me, it's more so to start, like I want to spend less time, maybe be on it once a day, if not once every couple of days. Put my phone in the other room when I'm working. It's so crazy in the beginning before I started adopting Catherine Price's tips. I put my phone away once in my bathroom and I found myself like trying to grab it. And I was like, oh, it's not there. Like you
Yeah, I
get
know.
so used to it.
Yeah.
It's like it's like a body part.
It totally is. It totally is. And it's like an annoying body part.
Yeah.
Right. So then what's your plan? I mean, I think that's a real practical example that many could probably benefit from, myself included. And for whether you're running a business on your phone or not,
Yeah.
just, taking a break. Like, so are there a couple first steps that are going to be helpful for you?
Yeah. I mean, again, as I said, putting in another room, but also really embracing time for idleness. I have an Apple Watch and I can just go and walk to the grocery store and pay for my groceries with my watch without being connected to my phone because there's no data on it. So that is something that I've started to do. And it feels so good. Like anytime I'm away from my phone and then I come to my phone 4 hours later, I feel so refreshed. Like, it's such an interesting feeling. And so I remind myself, how do I feel when I'm away from it? I feel great. Yeah. And I've also started to, and I've been really good at this lately, put my phone away before I go to bed. I don't want to look at it before I'm falling asleep because I tend to think about the things that I read before I fall asleep. And another interviewee I had on the podcast was Celeste Headley. She has a book called Do Nothing.
Okay.
That's really hard for us to do because our version today of doing nothing is sitting on our couch, scrolling. And that's not doing nothing. That's doing something. Like we need to embrace play. We need to go out and play a sport, connect with other people, have a long walk with a friend, disconnect. Like the problem is the thing is like we're usually doing something else while we're on our phone. And
we're always doing multiple things.
Yeah, we're multitasking. It's crazy. And Joshua Fields Melbourne, he's with the Minimalists, and he always says that we can do everything, but we can't do everything. We can't.
Mm. Yeah.
We can, but we shouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it just, the question that comes to mind, like just listening to you for all of us as well, is just to ask, like, what simple little changes can I make to my phone or my environment to coming back to that idea of not relying on willpower, essentially, to get to that point where we feel we can let our minds breathe and so forth. And there's so many things with the phone, like the simplest. I mean, we talked about it, putting apps, a few scrolls deeper in folders so that they're not super accessible, removing the notification bubbles and so forth. But even just getting into the habit when you put your phone down to flip it over so you don't see the screen,
yes.
right? Or just don't have it with you, period, like what you're speaking about. But like if you do need it, just flip it over. I mean, it's the smallest of changes, but the impact to your mind of not seeing things fire off, and frankly that too, like just trying to be as notification free as possible, especially with Apple Watches, like to your point. I mean, just I have an Apple Watch as well, but it's pretty silent. I mean, again, there's like our phone, like if they're great tools if we set them up to be a tool versus it kind of running us. And I think that's the big the big point to leave with. And it's possible. Like that's the thing. Like it literally is just a couple setting changes around. Don't have all your messages firing off on your Apple Watch. Like literally just use it for the time, or for you to intentionally go in to the wallet and pay for something. So
yes,
possible.
Yes. I always think back, like, what did I do before the phone?
I know.
I'm actually not that addicted to my phone, but I'm just hyper aware of my usage. And, I'm also being mindful about how many pictures I take, being more present in the moment when I'm out on vacation or just out and about in Toronto going for dinner. You don't need to take a picture every time you go out.
Yeah.
You don't need to track your life 24/7. That's stressful. I once heard someone say something about how the more you do something, the more you get to do that thing. So be careful.
Yeah.
Like if you are constantly posting, and it's not to build a brand, it's just to show everything that you're doing, but you find that it's stressing you out, stop doing it. Because the more you do it, there's going to be more responses. Sometimes I'll think to message a group chat, and then I'll be like, actually, I'm not going to do that, because then there's going to be a zillion questions coming my way. And that'll be a rabbit hole of 20 minutes. And do I really need to ask this question or share this funny GIF? Nope.
Yeah. It's so true.
It's the awareness piece that is
the
really
questions
huge.
again, though. Like there's the power of a question and a pause. Even posting, like if you take, and I would say like the theme for me in all of this is, in any invitations of practices or prompts, is to answer and go through this stuff without judgment. Like that's because we're so hard on ourselves. So I say this, do this, go through this flow without judgment. Like just take a look at the last, 5 to 10 posts that you've put on some sort of social media, and look at the photos or what you wrote, and just ask, like, why did I post that? Was it, there's usually something. And we're getting a little bit deeper here, that you can jump into a journal afterwards. But again, if you look at it from a place of non-judgment and just data that then you can play with, or insight, coming back to that formula, then you can start unpacking some mental clutter. Because usually we're like, are you posting that to show that you were at this place? Or like, what's the reason? What's the purpose of that? And was that serving you in terms of what you are trying to do, or how you're trying to show up, and how you're trying to feel, and the person that you really want to become, like the evolution that you want to go through? We're all on some sort of path at any given time, and just taking inventory of all of the things that we're doing. They're either in support or they're pushing us farther away from that path, right? So we just have to take some time to ask those questions, and it's okay if we don't like the answer.
Yeah. We're all imperfect. It makes me think about how, sometimes posts are to show people what we're doing, or the outfit we're wearing, or something like that. And it might be a boost for oneself. And I think that asking these questions is challenging, just like letting go of stuff, because sometimes we're scared to live authentically. We're scared to express who we actually are. But then on the other end, we have to be careful with presenting a version of ourselves that isn't us, right? So, and that's something I become hyper aware of too. It's like, who am I projecting socially? Like, I hope I'm projecting who I am, because like, this is who I am. I know who I am, and I hope I project that way. But, sometimes, people can read into things in many different ways, or see things in many different ways. And so it's be really careful. But back to minimalism, like it's a way of challenging yourself to see yourself fully. And, you're alone in an empty space, staring at a blank wall. And that's what this lifestyle challenges you to do. It challenges you to like rip yourself from your phone and stare at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself those hard questions, peel back those layers, and be like, okay, like, what is the inner work that I need to do? Like, who am I? Like, what, like, cause there's so much noise. Back to what we said at the beginning of this conversation. Like it's being real with yourself, being honest with yourself, and asking yourself those honest questions. And sometimes it's embarrassing, what your answers are, but trust me, it's very relatable. We've all been there.
Yeah. Well, and I'd rather do it now on my own terms than because eventually you do have to ask those questions. We all get to some sort of point where we're forced, we hit a wall or something happens, and then all of those questions will come up. So I'd rather be in a more proactive state and somewhat on my own terms to sit back and kind of assess and reflect and again, do that from a place of non-judgment and make some subtle changes than be forced and have to deal with something that's, can be really challenging and surrounded with really high emotions, depending on what's going on, right? It's just another perspective to have.
Now, Mark, I'm curious, can you share maybe one of your favorite interviewees, one of your favorite guests on your podcast, and some of the tools that they shared that maybe you've adopted in your own life?
Ooh, this is a hard question. There's so many of them. What comes to mind? I'm trying to think of. I mean, there's someone that you won't know. This is not like a household name. Even though it's fairly popular through Rolling Stone magazine and so forth, and a writer, a gentleman by the name of Chris Schembra, and he comes to mind because gratitude. His whole thing is he's known for the gratitude guru, and runs sessions with people around the world and teams and whatnot. And I always think of him because one of the practices that he left on the show was just as soon as you think about someone, send them a message. Right.
I love that.
And I use this with teams, and we do it right in the moment because it shows, and I use his question and let them know that it's coming from him. The question is, if you could give credit or thanks to someone that you don't give enough credit or thanks to, who would that be? And you write their name down, or if they're still alive and with us today. If they're not, you can still do this and close your eyes and energetically send the message. But just send a message saying, hey, just thinking about you. Hope you have a great day. That's it. And typically they write back and say, wow, you just made my day. And then that reply makes your day. And what's not happening in that whole interaction is you're not looping on the thing that upset you or that was throwing your mind off. Right. And it just shows what's possible literally in the matter of seconds. And it's also a great way, it's a really great way to keep your network alive also. I mean, and it's one of those things that you don't plan, it's just someone comes up immediately, just take 30 seconds, send the message, and you're done. And the ripple effect of the gratitude and all the feel good chemicals, serotonin, dopamine, it all fires up instantly.
You really get a helper's high. It's such a good feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
about you?
I was going to make a joke. Don't tell someone if you had a dream about them. That's a little weird.
Exactly.
But if you're conscious and it's throughout the day, you think of a good friend, send them a line. You know how I have the practice of calling a friend, or seeing a friend once a day. I'm just so much more curious than I ever have been before. I want to know how my friends are doing. I want to help them if I can. I want them to share their problems with me. I've just been so interested in that. And I find I have such great friends. I have very vulnerable friends. They're very open with me about things. And it makes me feel really good that I can be there for them. I am also a caregiver by heart. In my nature is I like to help people. It makes me feel happy when I can make another person happy. And so I recognize that in myself. And I've really adopted the mindset of focusing on the things that I do have. I would say that has really helped me work through so much negative self-talk. It's Greg McKeown. He wrote the book Essentialism. I've interviewed him on that book and another book called Effortless that he wrote. Greg McKeown says that if we focus on what we lack, we lose what we have. And if we focus on what we have, we gain what we lack. I actually shared that with my mom last night.
Oh, wow.
And she was like, oh, I really like that, she didn't say it in those words, but I could just tell she took a really big pause after I shared that. And I could just tell that it really hit her. There's some things that are lacking, but look at all the amazing things in your life and all the amazing things in your kids' lives. There's so much great to be, proud of yourself for and proud of your kids for, and, I think a lot of us, we get stuck in that comparison trap. And this is another thing to do with social media. Don't believe everything you see.
No.
Sometimes when people post a lot, there's more issues. So it's being aware of that. And it's that gratitude. It's being grateful and recognizing what you do have that can give you more. If we keep focusing on the things that we don't have, we'll just keep pushing ourselves down. And
Yeah.
I honestly believe, Mark, that is what has helped me juggle everything in my life. It's helped me realize, okay, like, what is most important to me? What is not? And Greg McEwen, he always says, focus on what's essential and eliminate the rest. For
Mm,
me, what's most essential is my work, my friends, my family. And at one point in my life in 2020, I had so much going on. I also had a modeling career. And so I was like, hey, this is the least important to me. So I'm going to get rid of this. So I'm not
yeah.
doing that anymore. I made
Yeah.
that challenging decision, but it gave me newfound space to focus on the things that matter most to me. So,
Yeah.
and that's what's hard about this. It's like you have to let go, but letting go is going to give you newfound space to have that time to breathe and rest and just relax your mind and all these things that come with, living with less. So,
Well, it's just to me it's removing a mental weight, and it
yeah.
often feels physical as well, right? So it's if we can look at it from that perspective, then sure, there might be some hard decisions, but like who doesn't want to feel lighter, and just kind of flow and whatnot. And the more you go through those exercises and check in with yourself and so forth and make those decisions, to your point, the more life I find just flows personally and professionally. And we just need, I think, the like kind of a final thought on this side, as I realize we're getting close to time for me, is just we just need reminders. Because like what you said to your mom, I'm willing to bet the overall concept she's heard several times before in her life, right? But it was the way you framed it, that, and kind of coming back to us interviewing people and sharing different stories, like that's what made the difference.
Yeah.
And we all need that because we're surrounded by the opposite over and over again. So it's like for me, it's how can I over index on like positive, healthy reminders, whether they're gratitude things or practices or just checking in with myself and having more than what I think is normal and enough to outweigh all of the other noise that we've been talking about, because it's there, and just be
Yes.
real that it's there. And then it becomes really, not that it's perfect, but feels a lot better. And it kind of comes back to, you start waking up, happier and excited and motivated more days than not. And I just think we deserve that.
I agree. And, we actually have 3 questions to kind of close this discussion
Okay.
today. And I'll start with the first. And I'm curious, Mark, what is making you happy right now in this season of your life?
Oh, the thing that comes to mind or that's most present is I've done a lot of work to be conscious or present of where I'm pushing versus flowing. And I'm starting to see or feel the results of that with the people and like various business partnerships, and just being, okay, yeah, like there's such alignment there. There isn't friction, or there isn't like I've got to follow up 100,000 times or something. It's just it's flowing. So I'm really, that's giving me a lot of good vibes, let's just say, and also just helping me be more and more present and to pick up on those signals.
And how did you become aware of this? Was it taking those pauses and realizing, hey, like this is not making me feel good. This is much easier. Like I should choose this route.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was, but it was someone on the podcast that was talking about the topic. And then I remember I just wrote the question down in my journal and saved it for the next morning, something around the lines of, where am I pushing versus being guided to, or where am I pushing versus where am I flowing? And I zoomed out and looked at everything that was kind of in play, projects and things like that. And first of all, I was like, wow, no wonder my mind feels full. Like there is a lot going on, some obviously things requiring more and more attention, but still there was a ridiculous amount of projects. And then I went through that filter of, this one feels good. This one, no, there's
Mhm.
something there, right? And usually then you get into that next question of like, well, what am I pretending not to know? Well, I'm pretending that not to know that this is not going to work out, even though I want it to work out, but I'm investing all of this mental energy at the expense of all of these other amazing things. And again, like this took minutes with a clear mind, first thing in the morning kind of thing. And I think that's an important point too, is having a question like that. And, I could have just answered it right away, but instead just took time to answer it with a clear mind first thing the
Mhm.
next morning. So,
I love the fact that you wrote everything down. You're like, okay, what is it? What is it that I need to kind of let go of? What is the area that's kind of stressing me out the most and draining me? That is
yeah.
such a fantastic practice. I think that's so helpful for people to do. A lot of people, they think about it, but writing it down is
Oh,
so
yeah.
helpful and just eliminating things.
Well, and I'm just, at least for me, like I'm a very visual person. So just to see, like I'm always trying to put everything on like one screen or one page and see everything from like a bird's eye view. And then, kind of taking inventory of what's going on. And the last thing, and this was new, but very helpful. I probably did this about 3 months ago, and I set that time container around that. I'm not going to change all of these things next week.
Mhm.
So I'm starting the process. Give yourself some time for things to naturally level out in some capacity. And some things obviously were direct decisions, and others where, all right, I'm not going to put energy there or as much energy. So I guess that's what I'm feeling now. The original answer to your question is I can see when I zoom back out, I'm like, okay, there are many more projects and people and situations that feel very aligned
Mhm.
versus, months back.
That's so great to hear. And for me, when it comes to this season of my life, I would say what's making me the happiest is, Mark, I have to tell you, I just feel so much more self-aware and
Mhm.
at peace with where I am today. There's still things in my life I want to change. There's a lot of fear right now in my life, but I'm like, I'm so at peace with who I am. And I think it's partially because I have such great relationships in my life. I'm so grateful for my friends and my family and all the relationships in my life. And for that reason, I feel like I'm being seen and I feel like I'm
Mm.
seeing others around me. And it gives me that sense of peace.
Yeah.
Even though, there's still things I need to work on. I'm like, oh, like there's that, ah, like I don't need to overly stress. And when I do in moments, I remind myself, look at all the things that you have. Again, going back to the things that I do have in my life. So,
Yeah.
and the next question is, what's a goal that you have for yourself this year, Mark?
I mean, the biggest goal I have, honestly, it's going to sound a bit strange, but is more of the same
Mm,
in the sense that I've spent a lot of time just trying to get clear on the path and being open and deploying practices to see the opportunities and see paths forward and so forth. So I just don't want to overcomplicate that
mm,
and try to go somewhere else and just really continue to focus on, okay, on the days where it's feeling like it's quiet or I'm, have self-doubt or I'm not
mhm,
sure, I'm anxious about something, that I'm just going to trust and lean on the practices and then go back, tomorrow's a new day kind of thing and just keep doing that.
mhm.
And it's been working well the last little while. So I'm going to stay on that track instead of adding something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Our default mode is always to add,
Yeah,
when really we should just keep it as is or subtract. Make us feel
exactly.
so much better. Again,
Yeah.
there's actually an amazing author named Leidy Klotz. I've mentioned him a few times. I interviewed him in the past, and his book is called Subtract
Oh
because
yeah. I've heard of
it
that
is
one.
so good. It is so good. I
Yeah.
highly recommend everyone read it. So my goal for myself this year, I actually have two. The first is I want to have better focus at work. So the
Hmm.
one thing that I've done is put my phone in the other room. Second thing I've done is I've adopted the Pomodoro method.
Oh,
It's a way of focusing your time on whatever task you're focused on. So it's 25-minute intervals. So I will work for 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break, and then do that 3 more times. And then once I've done 4 sets of 25 minutes with 5-minute breaks, I'll take a half an hour break. So I've been doing that. I've also been time blocking in my calendar, so I know where I'm spending my time. I know we're going over time right now. So I know where I'm spending my time. And then I also have adopted not specifically color coding in my calendar, because a previous guest of mine, Hamza Khan, he color codes his calendar based on his energy output. I'm just more aware. I'm like, okay, I have this one speaking gig, or I'm presenting, or I'm leading a team meeting. I'm not going to book a friend catch up right after, because I'm going to be exhausted. So I'm being more mindful. And the second goal I have for myself is to improve my communication. I find that
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Didn't expect that.
It's more so I feel like quality communication is being lost today, especially in this day and age where we're just texting each other, we're using abbreviations or new words that we've created ourselves to communicate with others. And again, words can be read in so many ways. So for me, I used to always make fun of my dad for writing text messages like he's writing an email, but I'm starting to do that now. I'm starting to give people full sentences. I'm trying to take the time to sit and focus on how I'm going to respond versus responding very quickly to people. When I'm on a phone call with people, I try to listen better, because when you're a better listener, you're a better communicator.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the podcast, I'm the editor of the podcast, so I'm much more aware of the words that I'm using when I'm communicating to you right now. I'm trying to skip the ums and the ahs so that I can be more clear in my communication. So I think communication, I think we could all better our communication, right? So
I agree. I see your point. Without the context, I would have been like, really? You're such a great communicator, but I get it. Again, it's like the autopilot. Like we're all just kind of doing the same thing. And then all of a sudden, basically, short, not even sentences, but like things that are almost sometimes not coherent become the new normal. It's so easy for that to happen.
Yeah. So let's create that. Let's stop that new normal and create our own version of the new normal where it's great communication.
Exactly.
Well, it was more from the perspective of, I was thinking, well, I love it when people are very, very good at communicating over the phone or via text message. And I was like, wow, I'm going to adopt what they're doing, because I really appreciate that,
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the last question for today is, for those who are feeling lost, what are 1 or 2 pieces of advice or helpful questions you suggest that people can ask themselves to build a better path forward? And I'm so excited for your response here, because you are the question guy.
Well, thank you. I mean, we've kind of talked about this stuff, and you just brought it up again. I think in the sense of looking at your calendar and being intentional with what you're scheduling after a talk or something like that. So my advice would be, it's just to start, and Friday is a great time to do this, but just start with a check-in. The more that we can check in with ourselves around, whether it's just, in the morning, how do I feel today? One word. And just identify that, right? And say, okay, well, if I'm not feeling great, then why? What's fueling that source of whatever the emotion is? And equally as important, if I'm feeling fantastic, why? So you can pull from that reserve of let's just say awesomeness and bring it back when we need it, when we hit a low of some sort. So just consistent check-ins. And on the Friday side of things is looking at your calendar and seeing what's scheduled for the next week. Looking at the week that just passed, like, is there anything that you would have changed there in terms of whether they're meetings or where you put your energy, how you handle the situation, like what did you learn? And most importantly, what can you celebrate? So much good comes every single day, but we need those reminders, because there's so much other noise happening that it's so easy for us to forget. But as we do these check-ins, then all of a sudden, like, this is where your insight's coming up. Well, you've probably at one point, how to talk like that and had a meeting right after, and you're like, oh, I'm not going to do that again. If we don't check in to see what's actually happening, then we can't make those little course corrections. And then it just becomes a cycle or a pattern, right? And then eventually we get to this point where, like, how did I get here? Like, why do I feel like this? Well, there are little clues along the way that with short periods, 5-10 minutes, can just generate so much insight and data.
Ah, that is so great. I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to be reflecting on my week as a whole.
Yeah, you'll love it. I intentionally do it at around 3 p.m. on a Friday so that it's not like you're trying to rush the day and close it off. And it's 30 minutes that I have blocked that is never canceled. It might be shifted a little bit, but for the most part, it's always reoccurring around that time. And it's just been a game changer.
Oh,
It's like
wow.
a PhD into your life, essentially.
Yeah. It's a reflection, right, on the week and how it went. And I was going to say something very similar. So my partner and I, every single day, we share how we rate our day. So
I like that.
That challenges both of us to take a pause and reflect on, okay, is it, it's between 1 and 10. Is it a 7? Is it an 8? Oh, is it a 9? And if it is a 7, and the day before was a 9, what was different today? What did we miss? How could it be better tomorrow? And these are the questions you start asking yourselves. But if someone is lost in life and when it comes to their career path, another question I recommend they ask is, what is it that makes you happy? What is it that lights you up? Like, what are those moments that you're like, oh, like I feel so excited and curious and I want to learn more? That's what I started asking myself once I started clearing the excess in my life. I was like, what gets me excited? Well, connecting people. What else gets me excited? Well, inspiring people, connecting people to other people that they can build things with, but also being able to share my own experiences and hear from others and motivate them and see them light up. Like for me, that's what I found. And I think asking yourself that question is really helpful. Also, like ask yourself, like, what are your values? And ask yourself if you're living by them, because you might not be living by them every day. And that might be what's bringing you down. I love this, Mark. Like, all the work you do is all about questions. And I think it's those questions that can be so powerful that can really change someone's life for the better.
They just give us the pause, the micro moments where we can make different decisions and give us so much insight. And for me, it's everyone is asking questions. It's just a matter of, are we asking the right ones, right? And are they of high quality and well-timed for where we're at in our lives? And again, this is just, we can all do this. Like, you don't require anything outside of you, your mind, and, ideally a piece of paper or a pen. But like I said earlier, I mean, it's just reflection. There are many ways to do that, but it's just taking time to still your mind and think and check in and so forth. And then everything else becomes so much easier and lighter.
And maybe it can be a fun practice between you and a friend. The next time I see you, Mark, you're going to come to Toronto. We'll go for a coffee or something like that. And we can come prepared with 3 questions each that challenge each other. That'd be
Sold.
fun.
I'm in.
Why not? Yeah. That'd be so fun. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This was so fun. It was a nice back and forth. Yeah. I'm so glad that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, you can see, I mean, obviously, like, we could go on forever. It's actually hard to stay within somewhat of our regular time of our episodes. So that's always a good sign of a good conversation. And you inspire me, Kelly. Like, you just seeing just the constant effort on the show and the beautiful guests that come on and what you and Lauren have done. And it's, the show is a reminder for me consistently around checking in and, like, what else can I do from a perspective of letting go and so forth. And I want to thank you for that and the ripple effect that you're having around the world because of, yourself following your curiosity and listening to your inner guidance and intuition and whatnot is helping so many people. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Letting go is just such an amazing feeling, and to be able to inspire others and especially you just makes me feel so grateful. So thank you so much.